I'm an independent consultant working for multiple organizations. CIALFO is who I'm representing today, but I also work with the IB, Cambridge, and NACAC, two of whom are represented on this panel as well. This is an exciting session. Wow, and for the last session, we have a big crowd here, so we want to make sure that we have time for lots of questions and answers and discussion. It's definitely a hot topic, one that's on the minds of a lot of people. Global politics and the potential impact on international student mobility and decision making. Before I allow my panelists to introduce themselves, to tell them their stories, I'd like to know a little bit about all of you. So how many of you are on the counseling side? You counsel for international schools. And of the counselors, how many of you are from India or South Asia? Okay, and how many of you are from outside of this region? Okay, wonderful, welcome. How many of you are representing higher ed institutions? Okay, so about half. And of the higher ed institutions, how many of you are from the US or Canada, so North America? How many of you are from Europe? Okay, welcome. How many of you are from Asia, Greater Asia, other parts of the world? Okay, wonderful. And how many of you represent organizations that are neither higher ed nor secondary? Okay, so we have a great variety that we will try to adapt our presentation to. This will be a discussion. The way that we will use our time is, first, we want to give you context of where this conversation, these insights are coming from. So I will allow my panelists, who I'm very proud to have assembled. We have incredible expertise on this panel from multiple perspectives. They'll tell their own stories, a quick elevator pitch on where their background and where they come from. Then we will have context and background from Rohan Pasari. CIALFO has put together some wonderful bespoke data that really frames this issue well. After Rohan gives that context, we're going to have a discussion centered on 4 topics, and those topics are listed here. We'll go through that, and then if I do my job right, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for open question and answer. So I hope that sounds all right to everyone, and with that, let's go to our introductions. So Michelle, because you're first on the list, I'm going to turn to you to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clay, and thank you for the invitation. Anytime Clay reaches out, I'm so excited because I get to share some of my knowledge or perspectives, but more importantly, I get to learn from all of you and these amazing colleagues that I'm here with. My name is Michelle Whittingham, and I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor of Enrollment Management at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And I'd like to share a little bit of my path when I first fell in love with international education. And it was all due to a basketball injury back in 1984. Might seem a little bit odd, but because of that, I ended up going to Panama for 1 year with an AFS exchange program because I was a 3-sport athlete and my world was really turned upside down because that was a big part of my identity. And so it was pretty crazy that, okay, this pathway kind of closed, so then I went to another pathway, and that completely transformed my perspective on the world. I'm originally from Spokane, Washington, and so I was in a very different community, and so it just really opened my mind. And so then, of course, I had to graduate and go seek a degree in international affairs, mainly business and economics, and of course minoring in Spanish. And so I then had the opportunity, some of us kind of end up in higher education. When I was studying, I never imagined there's like this career in higher ed, and I now celebrate my 30th year in higher education, which seems pretty crazy. Thank you, Clay, I will take that. And so after getting that degree, you kind of have ideas of what you might do. And when I interviewed to places, I'm kind of like, you tell me why I should work for you. It goes, those interviews, when you're confident of what you're doing, goes in both directions. And so I kind of started in the, credit union banking industry, and then had an opportunity to work at a comprehensive regional university at Eastern Washington University. And so lo and behold, I went to work there. Somebody asked me, well, Michelle, what are you going to do? Like, I don't really know, but it sounded like a lot of fun. And so here 30 years later, and initially I didn't work with a lot of international students. I worked with students all over the state, and of course some international students that were interested, but we had an office. And then I had the opportunity to go to UC Santa Cruz back in 2007. And I was quite astonished upon arriving on campus that we had so few international undergraduate students, and frankly, so few domestic out-of-state students. And so from 2007 to 11, I was kind of curious, but then we really began an effort in 2011 to truly internationalize not only different aspects of the campus, but also our new student programs. One of the very first things we did is host Indian counselors and principals on our campus. And that was really this next transformative moment in my career. So you go from an exchange student to fast forward almost 20 years. And the counselors and principals, when they stood up to introduce themselves, I'd never seen so much pride. And so then in 2017, Ganesh Kohli, who you all know, said, Michelle, are you going to go to IC3? And I'm like, IC what? And so before I knew it, I was at my first IC3 conference in 2017, speaking as part of the Presidential Forum, and I have been part of the IC3 community ever since then. And it has rejuvenated my career as an enrollment manager who's responsible for all undergraduate enrollments, the international, the California, the out-of-state, the first year, and the transfers. And so it's an honor to be here. I continue to learn and to have a lot of fun and share our love for international education. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And you definitely don't look like you could have possibly been in the industry, even though your wisdom definitely says so. You know, as someone who's been in the industry for about that long, but I have gray hair to show for it.
Well, let's be honest, Clay. My hair would look just like yours if I didn't have this beautiful coloring.
And we're glad to have someone representing the Republic or California, which many of us, especially those that come from the East Coast, says could be its own country based on its politics. So now let's move to Rohan. City, state, international student yourself. Rohan, tell us your story.
I'll keep it brief, though. Thank you, Michelle, for that wonderful journey. I've been in this sector for a little over 12 years, but really the journey started when I was an international student myself, growing up in Calcutta, going to a school that didn't really have any college counseling help. I went to La Martiniere. So, you know, navigating this entire process of applying to universities in the US and the UK all by myself. And it was very much by chance that I ended up understanding about the education system in Singapore. I applied, I got a full scholarship, and I came to NTU, Nanyang Technological University, which changed my life. And it taught me how much of an impact international education can have on the life of a student, as well as his family. And that inspired me to start CIALFO about 7 years back. So CIALFO started as a software platform to work with high schools around the world. We work with over 1,000 high schools around the world, mostly in Asia though, and we also work with universities, helping universities use our platform for their recruitment needs. So we've grown over the last 7 years, and it's a pleasure to work with this wonderful colleagues and show you some of the data that we have today.
Yeah, it's wonderful to work with CIALFO, and then to have an international student who has with a background in entrepreneurship, engineering, you know, economics. And speaking of economics, I want to go to Paul Toulon, who I've worked with for many years, even before he was with the IB. But Paul's an expert on all things economics and politics and curriculum. Paul, could you introduce yourself?
Wow, that's some billing. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Paul Toulon. I'm the head of global recognition at the International Baccalaureate, where I've been for about the last 5 years. But to share a bit about my journey, I was first in family to go to higher education. I grew up in a relatively poor area of East London, and I had a university rep came to my public school from one of the leading universities in the UK. And she said to me, what are you studying? And I said, well, I'm studying 6 A levels. And she said, no, you must mean GCSEs. And I was like, no, I am actually doing that level of study. I was lucky enough to get awarded a place at the University of Cambridge where I read economics, and then I enjoyed my time there, that I wanted to give something back to that institution, so I worked encouraging students from non-traditional backgrounds in the UK to go to the university, and one of my pleasures was that I then became a colleague of the lady who came to my school who told me that I wasn't good enough to go to the university. So that was an interesting introduction. I then worked at the University of Oxford for nearly a decade, again leading two very diverse groups. One, I was supporting kids from underrepresented backgrounds, from low-income backgrounds in the UK to get to Oxford, whose counsellors often knew very little about the university. And I also discovered that, weirdly, international counsellors often didn't know that much about the university as well. So two very different groups serving two very different economic groups of students actually had the same challenge. Some was around distance, some was around access to information. I then moved to King's College London, where I was Director of Admissions for a decade, and I had the pleasure of working with Dolan. And one of the things we did there was about fairness and equity of access based on qualifications. We tweaked our IB entry requirements there slightly and grew to be the largest destination of IB students in Europe. For me, it's about fairness and equity of access, whether it be admissions, whether it be for credit, to make sure that our students have got that access. But I try to have that helicopter view, and being at the IB gives me that opportunity. The IB sends students to over 4,500 different universities every year in 110 different countries. Some we send 1,000 transcripts to a year, some we send one transcript to every decade. But if it's your son, your daughter, your niece, or your nephew, you don't care about that math. You care about them having fair chance, fair access at the university. But what I try to do is make sure that I'm kept abreast of what's going on in a variety of different markets, because, as we'll come on to, the politics that's going on in everyday lives is impacting on international students. They're being used as political pawns in lots of different locations, and we'll come on to discuss that hopefully during the panel.
Thank you, Paul. And Murphy Miller.
Hi everyone. Still not over Paul taking 6A levels. That's next level. I am Murphy Miller. I'm NACAC's Director of Membership Experience and Global Engagement, which gives me the privilege of interacting with NACAC's 27,000 members across 70 countries on a daily basis. It is truly a dream job to work with so many incredible people like you all. I was perhaps an anomaly when I was approaching the university search and application process. I loved it. I created my own rating system. I was very into it, and so when I started at my undergraduate college, I actually joined the admissions office as a student staff member before classes even began freshman year, and worked my way up, and then actually worked at Pitzer College, my alma mater, as my first job graduating. So I worked in undergraduate admissions at Pitzer College, then I transitioned to Savannah College of Art and Design, SCAD, where I supported all 4 of their global campuses at the undergraduate and graduate level. Then I worked for a number of years at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where I did a lot of different things, but to include international enrollment. So my main territory was the Middle East. I also covered the great state of Delaware, and had the privilege of visiting India a number of times as well. I then transitioned to work as a counselor based in London, United Kingdom. I supported students in their applications to North American universities from across Europe, working at places like Wellington College and St. Mary's Colne and others. And then I had a very happy time working at C Alpha with Rohan, and since have come to NACAC, where I get to, again, interact with all of you all and drive our international initiatives. We very intentionally have paired global engagement with the membership experience at NACAC, so that everything we do as an association has a global lens, because we understand the importance of the international education community, and we want to make sure that you all feel supported by us. And I should just mention, we are a nonprofit membership association. If you have questions, you can find me in the booth downstairs, but that's my pitch.
Thank you, Murphy, and then want to congratulate Murphy's been a key leader with his colleagues Angel, Chantel, who many of you know, but in facilitating a partnership a collaboration with IC3 to advance professional learning and collaborate between the organizations. So thank you, Murphy, for your leadership there. Rohan, can you start us off by giving us the macro data and the context to launch this discussion? There you go.
All right. Thank you, Clay, and thank you again for joining us. It's pretty much a full house here. And we're going to rush through some of this data because we really want to spend more time, or rather invest more time talking about this data. So we're going to go through some of the macro data, and we're also going to talk about some of the policy changes that we see that are happening in a lot of the countries that our students go to. So we're going to start off by showing this data. So in CIALFO, we look at a lot of the macro data and we analyze across a lot of the source markets, a lot of destination markets, what are happening. And we looked at 4 major destinations, US, UK, Australia, and Canada. And we looked at both undergrad and grad school data just to see what the international mobility trends have been. This is 2023 enrollment data across these 4 destinations. And the sources for this data, because I know a lot of you would be interested in understanding where this data is coming from, is Open Doors for the US, UKVI for the UK, IRCC for Canada, and the Australian Government Department of Education for Australia. So we saw this data and we analyzed this, and we spent a lot of time really breaking this up into a lot of nuance given our expertise. Just to give you a sample, when you look at total enrollment data, it's not always a good representation because it includes enrollments in community colleges and vocational programs. That's not really a good representation of what's happening in our community that we serve. So we took that data out. And also total enrollments across all destinations is not the same. UK, typically students are enrolled for 3 years. In the US, students are enrolled typically for 4 years. So we did all of that math, and this is what we saw. So the 2 important trends that we saw was in 2023, UK overtook the US as the #1 destination for incoming international students. So that represented 32% of all destinations, of all these 4 main destinations, US, UK, Australia, Canada, which to me was a surprise because I've been in this sector for like 12 plus years. US has been sort of this largest destination, but we saw UK in 2023 overtaking the US. The other key insight was that India now is the #1 source market in this sector, overtaking China, but quite significantly. So India represents now 28% of all students going to these 4 key destinations at 28%, and Asia as a whole, so India, China, Southeast Asia, Middle East, all of that is actually not Middle East. The rest of Asia constituted 73% of all students going to these 4 destinations. But in IC3, we don't really work with graduate students. Obviously, neither does CIALFO. We focus on undergrad. So we looked at the undergrad data, and the trends there was slightly different. So this is what we saw, that 273,000 students, new international students in undergrad programs to US, UK, and Australia. So we removed Canada because in the IRCC data in Canada, the Canadian information was not split by grad and undergrad, so we couldn't sort of analyze that. So we took Canada out, and what we saw was UK was still the #1 destination, so constituting 39% of these 3 destinations, US, UK, and Australia. And in fact, India was not #1. China continued to be #1 for the number of students going for undergrad programs to these 3 destinations. So that was at 28%. So really interesting. So then we analyzed this data even further from a destination market specifically. So you see US on the first column, UK in the second column, and Australia in the third column. And we compared the data from 2018 to 2023. So what are the trends like from 2018 to 2023? So US, as you can see, has remained sort of flat. It peaked in 2016. This data is not represented here, and sort of declined and remained flat, grown slightly from 2018 to 2023, from 300,000 students to 320,000 students. Undergrad students incoming has actually declined by 22% as of 2023 as compared to 2018. And postgrad or grad students, in fact, increased by 22%. UK, on the other hand, increased by a significant 145%, hugely underscored by the intake of grad students. And undergrad also increased by 70%. And then Australia showed a modest increase across grad and undergrad at 26%, with undergrad and grad again being consistent at 27 and 25%, respectively. Why some of this data is really important, and to see the difference between grad and undergrad explosion will then help you put context to why some of these policy changes perhaps may be happening in some of these destination markets. So this is the growth or trends from 2018 to 2023 from a destination market perspective. Then when we look at the same data from a source market perspective, and we focused on 3 regions. We focused on India, China, and rest of Asia. Rest of Asia does not include Middle East, so it includes South Asia, Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, and Central Asia as well. So India, as you can see, has seen a massive increase across all of these 3 key markets at a 150% increase across undergrad and grad. This is underscored by both increase in undergrad and grad school students. Undergrad has doubled from 22,000 to 45,000, and grad has also increased significantly from 83,000 to 215,000 students, going from India to overseas. That relative to China is different, where China has sort of flattened, has remained the same from 33,000 to 241,000. Undergrad has declined by 10% to 77,000, but it's still higher than India. And grad has also has shown a moderate increase. And rest of Asia has also increased significantly, wherein undergrad in rest of Asia has increased significantly more. We'll take questions later if you don't mind. Sorry, so that is actually postgrad for rest of Asia. It's a spelling error. So that's 85%, and undergrad has increased 27% for rest of Asia. This, when you contextualize with how does international students sit with the rest of their domestic class in these destinations. So UK, in UK, the international student cohort constitutes 22%, and it's similar in the other big destinations, Australia 24%, Canada 30%, whereas in the US it's 6%, which is significantly lower. That may or may not be a representation of the capacity that US still has in taking in more international students. And I do think, that does indicate more capacity, and we'd love for the rest of the panel to chime in on that. But 6% with also much bigger institution number of 3,800 plus. So this was really interesting for us to analyze as well. And then the last piece on this macro data is IB data. So to Paul's point, a lot of transcripts are being sent from IB, and we analyze that data as well. It's public information. 40% of all IB transcripts are actually sent to the US. 80% of all IB transcripts are sent to the Big Four destinations and Netherlands, Singapore, and India. And if you just look at the Big Four destination, that's 75% of all IB transcripts. So that was also a key point. And the last bit on this data part is CIALFO's data. So we analyze all of this macro data, and we wanted to contextualize this to CIALFO data to understand how does CIALFO sit in across all of this international mobility as well. As you can see, CIALFO from India, China, and rest of Asia only has about 30,000 students going to US, UK, and Australia. We did not look at Canada for this purposes. 18,500 in the US, close to 9,000 in UK, and then Australia about 3,000. And then we saw that the market share is 35%, which we found quite staggering, from Asia to the US, and then 12% in the UK. And then we contextualized for IC3 the India data, and we saw that 46% of all students from India that go to the US go through CALFA, which we found even more staggering, that 1 out of every 2 students from India going to US undergrad go to CALFA, and that's 8% for the UK and lower in Australia, which sort of helped us contextualize when we saw the IB data as well, given a huge percentage of our schools are IB schools here, and a huge percentage of IB schools have this trend of students going to the US. So that sort of corresponded to that as well. So really helpful, this data to contextualize in the next 30, 40 minutes or so. And then some of the policy changes, right? So when you see this explosion that has happened over the last 5 years, especially more in the grad school side, we can maybe start making sense on why some of these policy changes are coming through these destination markets. So if you're following the news in Australia, we saw the caps being announced yesterday, or was it 2 days back, and 270,000 students is the cap, 145,000 students for universities, which is the number that matters to our community. But before this cap, there were more restrictions added to the post-study work visa in Australia. Similar, this was on the back of what happened in Canada earlier in the year. A lot of policy changes in Canada. Similar policy changes in Canada as well. Changes in post-study work visa, as well as the caps in different provinces. And then the UK, the Conservative Party added a lot of restrictions also early in the year. Some of that rhetoric has changed, looks like, with the Labour government, but the policies are going to remain intact, which we think, or the media says, that could benefit to the US if no such changes are made, right? US being static with no changes may help or may benefit from these changes happening in other 4 destinations, but so far we've not seen any changes, right? So a lot of turmoil, a lot of changes, a lot of policy evolutions happening in this sector, and this is an interesting time for our industry. Those who've been here for a long time, those who are new, and I want to bring Clay back to help understand why, what, and when.
Well, thank you, Rohan. And we wanted to note, like, as a jumping off point, I'm going to start with Paul to really dig into some of what are how and why these political dynamics are playing out in key destination countries. I did want to show, because I put in some of the US slides, there's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of ambiguity and arbitrariness, but that slide about former President Trump in an interview mentioned that foreigners who graduate from US colleges should get a green card. That was then reversed almost within 24 hours, where he then said H-1 visas were very bad for Americans. And this was, so it created a lot of confusion overseas. I also wanted to note that since we've been talking about, in the time from, say, International ACAC, which many of you may have been at, we have a new presidential candidate whose parents were both international students, went into the UC system, and one of her parents, her mother, is from Chennai. So a very stark contrast between the two. So I want to start with Paul there about those political dynamics and go into more detail, particularly in Europe, Australia, and Canada. Paul.
Thanks very much. One of the things that I think at the beginning of this calendar year, people didn't necessarily recognize it, but over 50% of the global population are going through a general election this year. So whether it be here in India, whether it be Indonesia, Brazil, the UK, the USA, the whole of the European Union, this is a very big election year. And of course, one thing that international students, there's many things that international students do. They bring great wealth to a country, they bring diversity to a country, they bring skills to the country, but they can't vote in that country. And so obviously this means that when politicians are speaking to their base, to the people who are going to get them re-elected, they don't need to worry about that group. Their finance minister, their chancellor, may be more worried about it from a tax revenue point of view, but actually they're not going to vote. And I think one of the things that's been interesting for me, there's always been in different countries at different times. We've seen, Australia, international students been in vogue and then not out of vogue and back in vogue, etc. And you've seen this in a number of countries. I think one of the things that's interesting as a different dimension is, I think in the past, if I'm honest, a lot of it has been broadly around moderate racism and the colour of the skins of international students coming. What I'm starting to see is that's being positioned in a more subtle way, or maybe not so subtle way. It's actually being positioned around housing.
Mm-hmm.
Can local residents get housing, and are international students displacing them from being able to have housing? And suddenly that feels much more tangible to local voters. And I think the thing is that, and I remember I did, just after Brexit, I did a really, there was a lot of worry about in the UK about, will international students be welcome? So I basically plotted the Russell Group universities versus the areas that voted to remain, and there's almost a perfect correlation. But the challenge is the voters that often some of the political parties towards the right are trying to tap into are not where the universities are. And so how do we make voters in that area feel the benefit of an international student? If you're sitting in rural Wisconsin, do I get benefit from international students? I see these great things. Universities will produce these great stats saying how much wealth they bring to a country. In rural Nebraska, am I feeling that wealth there? If I'm in the UK and I'm in rural Lincolnshire, which for those of you won't know that local context, but there are very few international students living in that area. And of course, people are voting with that. So that change around housing, and I've seen that now come up in Canada. I've seen it come up particularly in the Netherlands. And in the UK, there was even a press headline which said, students have to go and live in different country in order to live at their university. Now, this was a slightly nuanced thing because it was effectively students at a university very near the Welsh border. So they were studying in England and they were living in Wales. It's not a big commute. It's less than one side of Delhi than the other. But this was the rhetoric that was there. And I think what we're seeing is countries being pushed and pulled around this point. But the fact that it's being made much more tangible to the local voting public, it's about housing. It's not now about the colour of the skin of the students who are coming in, and perceptions and xenophobia, etc. But we are seeing this, and I think the challenge for universities in these countries is the yo-yo effect. And we were talking about the balance of political class having a stability of voice. I know that effectively the UK, probably 15 years ago, was seen as being very draconian. Post-study work visas were pulled, etc. And that's created a detriment that lasted for many, many years. And so university systems going backwards and forwards between, yes, we want you, no, we don't, post-study work visa, no post-study work visa. All of these things really come into play. And it's like a giant game of whack-a-mole, which is like a fair ground game, yeah? You have the things that pop up, you knock that one down, another one pops up. So you can see this in Europe. Effectively, if Holland's going to suppress the number of students, then there'll be another market that will pop up, but then there'll be a problem there. Will it be Ireland? Will it be the English teaching universities in the rest of Europe? But there are destinations that are looking for more international students. So I just want to do a quick show of hands amongst the councillors. How many of you have had a student apply to university in Denmark? Wow, actually more than I expected. So the Danish government is really trying to get more international students to come to their country, but do they have all the right infrastructures? How many Danish universities are here at IC3? I think the answer, because I did go around the fair, is 0. How many Danish universities are at CICS? None. How many Danish universities were international ACAC? None. So there are markets that are looking to grow, but do they have the infrastructure? And I've now started to see the Czech Republic universities, Czechia universities, starting to be much more organised in their recruitment, and also the Belgian universities. So I think we're going to see, particularly in Europe, where there's good quality, low cost education, often though not always taught in English, I think we're going to see the rise of those, as long as the organisations within the university are set to make that change. So I think it's about being aware, but also trying to separate out the rhetoric from the reality. Actually, our colleagues in Canada said, you know what, actually things are good with us at the moment. We're happy with the visa policy. We've got plenty to give out. Our colleagues who we were speaking to in Australia the other day, she was like, actually, I was really happy with the policy. It could have gone badly, but I was content with the 2023 levelling. So it's about trying to divest, particularly parents, between the rhetoric and the reality of what the students are experiencing.
And that's creating a lot of whiplash. And what you said about all the countries in Europe could be repeated in Canada, particularly about housing. A little bit less so in Australia, but it's coming up. Michelle?
Well, and I think what's interesting with that, Paul, I really appreciated that perspective, because as a public institution, public research university in California, our rhetoric was a lot about are our students from other countries displacing the California students? And so we really went very proactively that says, no, the only thing displacing a California student is the California state budget. And so, again, it kind of morphs over time. And then, my colleague Bea is here, and I'm sure we have other public universities maybe in the room, but it just was like, oh, I didn't realize that. So as a public institution, even some of the rhetoric may be similar, but also different.
It does rhyme. And in fact, California as a whole, though, some of that messaging, so that symbol, the signal, was that international students weren't as welcome. And indeed, California lost about almost 20% of the students from year to year that were international. Now, they went elsewhere in the U.S., but California did lose that. Michelle, speaking of that whiplash, how do you, as you and your team are talking to students and families, how are they interpreting some of these messages? And does it put the U.S. in a place where, by being decentralized, do you feel like you may have some advantages in years where Canada was sort of, and UK were in a better position than we were? How do you feel about that?
Definitely. I mean, let's just take the elections back then, because look at the enrollment shifts that we had not too long ago that I was like, wow, we just diverted everybody up to Canada recently, about 4 or 5 years, maybe it was now even 6 or 7 years ago, perhaps 8 now. But I think the interpretation on the ground, and Paul, you did such a great job. I think my concern, and I think I hear this directly from our team, and one member lives right directly in Mumbai, is there is a lot of confusion. And I like to refer to it as noise. And so I will give an example even of counselors. Let me even share this today, because we did a session yesterday on the CBSE, and the nuanced difference between the California State University system and the University of California. And so my colleagues were like, Michelle, what did you say in that session? So this is alive and well within the IC3 conference today. I hear that the UC is giving credit now. And I'm like, no, that's not at all what I said. And so magnify that, but it was the California State University system. And so our colleagues, are hearing on the ground a lot of confusion. And I think, Clay, to me, what's really important is that we continue to build really accessible and trustworthy relationships with the individuals, with the counselors on the ground, with the principals on the ground, and of course with all the prospective students, because we want counselors, students, parents to feel free to go, like my colleagues who will never hesitate, Michelle, what are you doing? What are you saying? And I'm like, wow, thank you for asking. And so we have to be not only accessible, but we have to be really proactive with the intentionality of our communications. Because when you have people on the ground, that's where you can get ahead. We also have to anticipate that, oh my gosh, this is happening in Canada. That must mean it's also happening in the US, or it's in New York, so wow, it must be impacting California, or the public institutions in California versus the privates, never mind one system compared to another. Now, even within the University of California, we have some nuances. And so it's constant. And, I feel really lucky, let me just say that, because I have to know one institution and one system really well. I'm going to ask the counselors here, how many, on average, universities are you having to understand in a year? Throw some numbers. You're just shaking your head. You can't even calculate that. It's too overwhelming. Oh my God. And so we're very cognizant of that. So we have to be good partners, and even for us, and I've been at UC Santa Cruz for 17 years. I learn something new every day. And so I think we also have a responsibility to ensure the information on our websites are up to date, because my understanding that's one of your first resources. So we also have to be very clear of addressing and anticipating some of these issues that will be out there.
And some of the issues you're bringing up, like the decentralized nature, particularly of the U.S., which in some cases, say 4 years ago or 8 years ago, more likely, was a real problem.
Can't count either.
Because the U.S. doesn't have a national strategy. Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand can have a cohesive, national strategy. But when politics turn, then we're seeing what happens there. Whereas the U.S. is messier, and there is confusion.
It's an understatement.
But Murphy, with NACAC representing the collective of not only U.S. institutions, but a collective of global institutions, in this kind of turn in the road or inflection point, where do you see opportunities to collaborate, to cooperate, to make this clear for students and counselors? Murphy?
Well, and this is a good segue, because I was actually going to add to what you were saying about this idea of demystifying what's happening within the noise, and that's exactly why forums like this are important. So organizations like IC3, who are bringing folks together from both sides of the desk to better understand each other's roles. I think one of the things I learned very quickly when I transitioned from admissions to counseling was we would sit around a conference table in an admissions office and make decisions that we thought sounded great, and then it had a trickle-down impact onto the student experience. And as a counselor, I got to see how that tiny little decision created an extra barrier for a student, or sometimes, made it better, right? But it's important for us to have these opportunities to reach across the desk or the aisle, since this is a politically themed conversation, to ensure that we are making student-centered decisions, we're cutting through that noise, and we're supporting students comprehensively on both sides. I think in the US, obviously, on one hand, we do struggle because it is decentralized, and as a result, we rely on associations like NACAC to sort of create a collective voice and amplify the voice of our 27,000 members. We have done a lot of work in the advocacy space recently, certainly as it related to the race-conscious admissions decision from the Supreme Court. NACAC worked alongside other organizations to put together an amicus brief to kind of give our 2 cents on that particular topic. And so there are opportunities for organizations to kind of create a collective within the membership to ensure that we're amplifying that united voice. And I think there is a precedent amongst institutions to be able to work together and respond to issues within the field. A great example of that that I think of is the You Are Welcome Here campaign that a lot of U.S. universities and others participated in when we had a time in the United States where our political leader wasn't necessarily saying things that align with how universities felt. This individual essentially was saying, please don't come here, we don't want anyone to come, and universities were actually saying, hold on, I didn't vote for this person, we think the opposite, we want you here, right? And so that was a viral campaign that spread across thousands of universities, and suddenly everyone had a sort of You Are Welcome Here video and a hashtag, and I think it really was effective in assuring particularly international students that they have a home in a country. I think what we also have to remember is, again, these political leaders don't always represent the feelings of the country or the state that they represent, right? And there again, we have to cut through the noise. So not everything that you see is going to be that sort of reality.
And that kind of advocacy does have power. Back to I'm going to turn to Paul and Rohan to get us away from the U.S. But just one more aside about the U.S. is we have had issues with visa issuance. So not caps, but the visa rates of acceptance, particularly in parts of the global South, as Paul was mentioning, where skin tones are browner. We've had trouble, and the universities, as well as NACAC, as well as other partners, the President's Alliance, for example, have done some strong advocacy looking at those issuance rates and trying to resolve some of those issues. Paul, Rohan, well, let's go to Rohan first, and then we're going to move to question and answer in about 3 minutes. So we're going to be crisp. But Paul, how, we're talking about collectives. CIALFO represents a number of institutions, mainly on the secondary side. Could you talk about how your counselors at international schools, what are they feeling during this moment, and how is CIALFO looking to help?
Yeah, I think everyone's mentioned like all of these changes. It's hard to grasp, and media does not, I think, do a great job in adding any nuance or about this information. It's very generic. These are all international students, and I think either they don't understand it or they don't have the patience to go even one level deeper to help their readers understand this nuance. And if that becomes the main source of truth, or the main source of information rather for counselors and the community, it becomes hard for them to decipher like what is the impact for them and their students. So at least I want to help them understand, which I've heard from a lot of universities as well, that almost none of these changes actually impact undergrad students. Almost all of these policy changes have been created, to really impact the graduate students that are coming to these destinations. A lot of these really impact students that are coming for graduate programs, finding low-skill jobs, bringing their families along with them, and that's who the governments are trying to limit. So really, this does not impact the undergrad students. In fact, what we hear from universities is this will perhaps also help undergrad students, because there is a lot more focus for universities to bring in more undergrad students. Those are more sustainable ways for them to recruit. But that nuance is not quite often available, and then that creates anxiety and confusion. So yeah, I think it's minimally no impact, or in a lot of cases positive impact for this community, because you serve the undergrad community. So that's one of the things that we constantly do is continue to bring universities and high schools together. We do to Clay's point, what does CIALFO do? We do tours. We do a lot of work on our platform. Michelle said one of the main sources of information is on the university's website. That is true. A lot of this information about the university is compiled in a manner which is standardized on CIALFO. So constantly having the most updated information about visa requirements and admissions requirements.
So creating transparency, creating clarity,
and the most clear updated information.
And one of the key trends that I think Paul noted earlier is that kind of represents that whack-a-mole, which I love that metaphor to me. But that you as counselors, when I started, we mentioned my gray hair. I've been working in India a very long time, and prior, many of you really just had to know a few destinations, and most students would decide, so that you would be working with, well, this cohort would prefer the US, this cohort would prefer the UK, and you would separate them. That's not the case anymore. You're guiding the same student to 4 or 5 different country destinations, and that's a key shift. And I know, Paul, at the IB, you've really seen that in terms of where score sends are being sent. Let's move the question and answer with your comment. But how, from your IB perspective, how do you see some of these issues playing out?
Well, if you might, I was going to take a different tact, if that's okay. So outside of my day job, I'm on the governing body of 2 schools in the UK, one of which is in one of the most deprived areas of London. It's also the area that's got the highest rates of knife crime and gun crime. And the thing that we have instigated, and I've started to see it at a few international schools, is a transitions officer. And their job is to pick up where the counsellor finishes. Because what we were finding is that so many students were having to do, effectively, they were looking to transfer once they were already in college, or they were struggling with the transition to university. And we found our counsellors' time was being diverted between the group that you were trying to get through the early phase of college guidance, the group that you were trying to help through the application phase, and actually we needed someone to help with the first term and the first year. And it's a relatively small FTE appointment across a very large institution. But we felt that if we didn't have that, we were going to have the boomerang effect with students not landing well in university, not having a good transition, struggling with housing, struggling with fitting in, that sense of belonging that we all look for. Fit is at the end, I think, about do you belong? And we know that, for a lot of international students, they really don't feel like they belong at institutions, not all the time. Some universities are brilliant at it, some are less so. And so I wonder whether we'll see more in international schools the creation of these roles that support students once they've left you as part of that wraparound care. And you could say as a school, where does it end? But we felt that without having that role in place, that actually our students wouldn't be successful because we couldn't guarantee all the time that they were having that support or campus, or they just needed that networking and infrastructure built. So different direction to you taking it, Clay, but hopefully
But it rhymed, which I like. And so with that, we have about 10 minutes for open question and answer. This is a very big crowd. So let's see if I have a microphone, but who wants to raise their hand to ask the first question? Yes.
Is the ethical and moral responsibilities of recruiting universities, and particularly in relation to things like global conflicts. What are the responsibilities of universities worldwide to provide opportunities for the students persecuted in Gaza, or the students struggling in Ukraine or Sudan? Do universities just have to look at their balance sheets, or do they have moral responsibilities?
If I can, a little bit, I think a lot of it is about the mission of the university, because I think that's a really brilliant question as well as almost observation, right? A combination. And I think there's many of us as individuals, but being at a public institution, it's much, much more challenging. And so I think there are those institutions, depending on the type of institution, that are able to address that much, much better, because it's not that individuals don't desire to be able to do that. And that's where sometimes we'll work with others. And again, I love the, counseling, and it's about competency, not competition. So when our team has a conversation with the student, sometimes we will also try to help them understand who may have those resources available to do that. But it's often mission driven, I think, from the institution.
I think the other thing is, you're always worried about precedents. So if you do something in one situation, do you then do it in the next? And I've seen institutions get caught up in exactly this. So, institution did something for around, the situation within Russia and Ukraine. So then when you have Gaza and Israel, what do you do then? And how do you act consistently all of the time? Because you don't know what the next thing that might be is. And whilst... So, and we at the IB we had 2 schools in Sudan that were affected by violence there. There is almost something, I would say, every month that affects an IB school somewhere in the world, whether it be a natural disaster, whether it be political turmoil, whether it be Bangladesh, whether it be Colombia, whether it be Ecuador. So it's really hard, I think, to act fairly and consistently and without any form of prejudice. And I think that's a real challenge. Now, does that lead to us almost saying, well, it's easy to say nothing on anything than big, but it's really hard to strike that balance and be consistent. And I've seen this in a variety of the different organisations that I've worked at. Is you have to think really careful, not just about the case in hand, but what that you might do next week for something that might be much more substantial. A lot of the challenges we've seen recently have been, dare I say, in markets that have been relatively small for most universities, and so they've been able to deal with it in different ways. I think the difficult thing would be is what happens if it's one of the big markets, and then how would the universities react there, both from a, well, we can't afford not to react from a financial point of view. So that's I think that some of the challenges that different institutions face.
Okay.
We can't hear you. The aircon is like a raging thunder.
Hi everyone. now that there are caps in certain countries for visas or just further restrictions in Australia and Canada, although the US doesn't have a cap, I think there's a spike in visa refusals last year. There was the highest on record. I think 35% of all international students applying for F1 visa were refused their visa. So while the US doesn't have a cap in news headlines, is there more of a subtle cap? And how do US universities advocate for more free and well, transparent visa practices, so I guess students can be more equitably judged for their visas?
If I can start a little bit, thank you so much for that question. I do think it is important, and we're kind of right there with the students trying to figure out what's going on. And a lot of the universities, public or private, in my opinion, we've got state government relations, we've got federal government relations, and it's upon us to be able to communicate and advocate on behalf of our students. Sometimes I think it's great. When we had some issues several years ago, one of our students from Vasant Valley School here was reaching out and working with our federal government relations. So we'll support the students to also advocate. And then the embassy, like, I don't know about all of you, I loved hearing from U.S. Ambassador Garcetti yesterday. And we have to be, I think we're accountable and responsible trying to reach out and understand and advocating on behalf of the students. So again, it's not really being complacent, but also seeking to understand and doing what we can. But no, I'd love to hear, Murphy, if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't work for the State Department, so I can't answer, what they're thinking there. But I think this is another example of the whiplash that can take place for students. They hear from students, we want you, we want you, we want you, apply, they're admitted, and then all of a sudden their visa isn't approved. But that's no fault to the university. To Michelle's point, it's like, we do want you, we genuinely want you here. And I think one of the frustrations, of course, is very, very infrequently are you given any feedback in terms of why your visa was denied. So it could have been any number of reasons. But this is exactly why it's so important to create a collective voice. And to Clay's earlier point, organizations like NAFSA and NACAC are urging government to ensure that we ease visa processing delays and that we ease the number of visas that are being denied, because it really, isn't right. And we've heard, just since being here, I've heard so many horror stories about it, right? And it does put students in such an unfair position. So the onus is on the government to figure it out, and the onus is on us to ensure that they know that this is important, and we need to take these matters seriously.
Okay. Please.
Hi, I'm Teresa Urist from Aga Khan Schools. One of the things that I find, and just I don't know how many folks are aware of this, is that, for example, the IRCC in Canada for Canadian visas, they're using AI for a first pass on visa applications. I had a kid this past year, 100% scholarship, gets rejected due to lack of funds. So just to give you a sense of what's going on out there, that they are literally using AI for a first pass on visa applications in Canada. And so we've seen greater numbers of visa refusals, even with kids that have all the adequate everything. And our schools, we've got a lot of schools in East Africa, we've got India, we've got Bangladesh, just to give you a sense. But we're seeing increasing numbers of the refusals coming, particularly where the crunches that we're seeing is particularly out of Canada. And I spoke to an immigration consultant in Canada about this, who laid out for me exactly what's going on with how the process is working there, and it was a little disheartening in terms of this AI piece. So, thank you.
We have time for one more. Yes.
Really like this session. I mean, the one good part has been that we have been doing a lot of sessions for Australia as well, wherein we just talk about all the myths and the challenges. I mean, we saw one of the screenshots as well, where it says Australia took away all the post-study work permits. We have an ACTA agreement right now, wherein if Indian students go there, score 75% and above, they get extended work permit as well. So, I mean, what do you think, like, as university representatives, do you think us being out there, right, with the counselors, do you think that really helps us to mitigate the political risks that are accompanying, and can that take away the myths part as well?
Absolutely is my first response because you do, and you have to be careful. And I thought it was great yesterday. Again, I think as Paul had mentioned, there was somebody from representing Australia, because what's true today at what is it 3:15 in the afternoon, by 3:18 it may not be true anymore. But I think that's where my point about trustworthy, consistent, and accessible relationships are important, whether it's counselors, principals, parents, other organizations. But yes.
Okay, well, we're right at time. I want to thank our panelists for an exhilarating discussion. I think thank you for being concise and providing some very practical insights. And I wanted to thank you as an audience for being here, for being interactive and sticking with us. So thank you. Appreciate it. Everybody have a great conference. Bye-bye. And if anyone wants the presentation, there's a QR code here, but we can also send it to you if you want to give us your card.
And return to the student volunteers. Thank you.
That's being recorded. So hi, how's it going? We're a few, so might as well get acquainted. How are you guys feeling today? Are you parents? Teachers? Counselors, teachers? A principal? And you? A teacher? And all of you come from the same school? But not you, a different school. So hi, my name is Daniel. I'm gonna stand closer to you so that we can connect better. I'm from Colombia, if you're wondering. Do you know where Colombia is? The capital of Colombia? Who can guess? I'm not gonna ask the teachers. No, I'm not looking at your phone. That's cheating. Bogota. Bogota. So I live in Bogota. I'm not from there. I'm from another region. I'm from another city in the country. It's a middle-sized city. It's called Pereira. A lot of people don't know that in Colombia we speak Spanish. Very good. So we speak Spanish, and yeah, I'm here to give this session on how to protect your data and yourself. I have to say I'm not I'm not an IT expert. I'm a medical doctor by training, and I've worked for many years in the field of adolescent and youth health and well-being, and particularly in the last few years, I've dedicated my time to a startup. I didn't know that I was going to become an entrepreneur, never thought about it. I went to medical school, thought I was going to be like a traditional medical doctor, but if you're wondering about big decisions in your life and career choices, don't worry too much. I went to medical school, I graduated medical school, but then at the end of medical education, I thought that I wanted to dedicate my time to public health. So I was like, oh no, should I have studied something else, maybe political science? But then I didn't pay a lot of attention to that, and I'm focusing on this because you're mostly students, and maybe you're going through some of these decisions in your life, and I want to give you a little peace of mind. So I thought at some point maybe I should have studied something else. I was in 5th year of medical school. I didn't get a lot of stress, very stressed, because I thought, being a medical doctor gives me a depth of knowledge, technical knowledge, and then I can go and study something else if I want to build other skills. So I went and I worked for a little bit, and then I did a master's in public health and a master's in public policy, and at that time I really wanted to work in government or in UN agencies and NGOs in health policy. So that made a lot of sense. And I was already heavily involved since I was a student. But then I started getting frustrated with how the development world works, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So I thought I could learn a lot of things from the private sector and from the business, and I became an entrepreneur a few years ago. And now I work in the field of school health and well-being. So it's all connected, if you see. I suffered bullying heavily when I was in high school. I felt unseen many times. I needed help and no one took notice because I wasn't failing my classes, I wasn't fighting with anybody, I wasn't crying. And so many times we need help, we don't know that we need help, and no one notices. So just call out to ask your fellow student or friend how they're doing, if there's anything bothering. US teachers as well. Sometimes we only notice those who are noisy or who are fighting or who are giving a hard time, but not everyone has a red flag above their head. So that's my passion. I'm obsessed about this, and as you can see, this is a conference on career counseling. And so don't give too much importance to the career that you're going to study. You can have second thoughts, you can change careers, you can change whatever you want to do in life. That doesn't define you. And so I just wanted to start with that because I know it's a stressful time and it can be stressful. So I've done many things, and maybe in a few years I'll do something else. But everything that I've studied has given me knowledge, skills, experiences that I can put to serve a bigger cause. And so what's important for you right now, I would say, instead of just focusing on the career or in the university, is focus on where your passion truly lies. What are the problems that you want to solve for the world? That's the most important thing. Because there are millions of ways you can address that problem. I could have gone to marketing and still working at lesson in youth health and well-being. I could have been a lawyer and still worked in this field. I could have studied economy, whatever it was. So try and focus and find your interests and your passion, and then things will figure out on their own. Just go with the flow. So because I work a lot in adolescent and youth health and well-being in schools, I want to talk to you a little bit about data protection and how to protect your data. So I've prepared a presentation. I'm going to talk about the importance of data protection today. Practical tips to keep your data safe. I want to keep this very light. And then how data can help protect you as well. Not only is data something that you need to be afraid about because someone's going to steal your identity or someone's going to hack your Instagram account or Facebook account or whatever it is. Data can also be used to support you and to support others. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. So just something more conceptual in the very beginning. We have different types of data. The most important data is your personal information. So personal information is the one that tells who you are. So if I have your phone number, if I have your address, even if I don't have your name, I will be able to track you down. Or if I say, tell me, which school do you go to? Tirigoinka. Tirigoinka. I'm going to go with that. And in what grade are you in? 11. Is it only one class or 11? And 11 what? 11B. So if I say, okay, there's a girl that goes to this school that I can't remember anymore, I don't know how to pronounce, that is in class 11B, and she has brown hair up to her shoulders, has eyeglasses, and she's wearing this bracelet. That is personal information that can help anyone track you down. More or less. You know, you understand where I'm coming from. So the data that can tell anyone who you are, that's personal data. So what are some examples? Names, emails, social media profiles, phone number, addresses, maybe some characteristic in your body that can help people identify who you are. So it's very important. And we want to keep that as safe as possible. Always. If anyone is going to treat and collect that data, they need to ask your permission. Always. And you need not only ask your permission, but you need to know why they're collecting that data, how they're using it, who are they sharing that with. And then you can always say, I don't want to give that information to you. You have the prerogative to say, I don't want to give that information to you. Or you can also say, I've given you my information in the past and I want you to delete it. You can also say that. And there are policies in place. the schools, you go to a restaurant or an application, they have guidelines like data protection guidelines, and you can ask them, and it has to show you what are the processes, what's the email address that you can write to in order to delete, correct, edit your information, or to ask for clarifications. There are other types of data. So schools particularly have your personal data. That's important. They need to know who you are in order to support you better. But they also collect other types of data, like academic data. Scores, tests, your overall performance in school, and that's important for them to keep. It's important that you know that they have this data. And other, like health and well-being data. Maybe some schools collect health records. If you're going to counseling, they keep track of that. They keep a report, correct? You have a report on every particular student, how they're doing, how they're evolving, if you have medical condition or mental condition, or if you're receiving medication. That's also collected, and it's important that you know. And you can edit it, you can ask to see it. So that thing you can do. And in today's digital world, protecting the data is just as important as protecting your phone, as protecting your bag, your personal belongings. So that's very important to know. Some positive uses of data. The data is used to measure and track academic progress. And that's important because sometimes when scores start to fail and start to go down, maybe that's a symptom of something happening at home, or something happening mentally or emotionally, or you're feeling afraid, or whatever that means. But it's important for them to really keep track of what's going on. We can also do risk assessments. So as a medical doctor, I know that, for example, in adolescents, it's very important to do depression screening at least once a year. Suicidal ideation screening, hearing screening, sight screening, because it's important for us to really understand your needs, your capacities, your strengths. But that there's also some risks that come with data management. Identity theft. Have you ever been, or have you heard of a friend that has gotten an account hacked? Have you heard about that? Many times. And do you know why that happens? Can you think of any way why that would happen, or any reason? What's that? Weak passwords. What else? Sharing your password to friends. Yeah, like phishing. So they send you a link on WhatsApp or an email, and you click that link, and then your entire passwords have been stolen. They can access your account. Online bullying as well. There comes risks with online bullying. Harassment, privacy invasion, and risky challenges. Do you know what risky challenge is? It's very common in Latin America. Do you know? Can you tell us?
So I had a friend who got his account hacked, and that guy who was using his account was posting some stupid stories and stuff.
Thank you. But there are also, so in Latin America, it's very common to have risky challenges. So some friends or some people post a video and say, I challenge you to do this. Now you're starting nodding. Have you, and you too. Do you want to say something? I'm going to share this with you because we cannot hear you very well.
So a couple of years back, there was this game that was kind of all the rage. It was named Blue Whale or something like that, and they had these challenges and stuff, and they were pretty gory and really gruesome. So
Thank you. And that, lives have been lost. Lives have truly been lost because of these challenges online. So it's important for us to know that that can happen. If a friend is undergoing, they want to do that, it's important for us to be also gatekeepers to that situation. And so I thought there were going to be more parents here. So I had some tips for parents particularly, and it is important. I know it's awkward. I can relate. But it is important to discuss with your parents or maybe the counselor or someone who you trust, an adult who you trust, to guide you and teach you, for example, how to protect your data. We're going to talk about that a little bit over here. But it's also important, particularly for younger adolescents, that parents and other people monitor what you're doing online. I know it's horrible and it's difficult, but it's important for them to really know, because when you are a child or an adolescent, it's very common that we start, and I've done it, engaging with other people online who we don't know. And sometimes there are risky situations where people ask for photos or get your personal information, or they inquire about your home and your family dynamics. And so it's really important for you to have conversations with any adult about how to protect that data, and maybe kind of express how you're using online platforms, how you're using apps, so that they also feel a little peace of mind. Because I can relate with you, of course, but I can also relate with parents and their concerns. And it is really important, and because they're left oftentimes out in the oblivion, they feel really concerned because they don't know, they have no idea what's happening with their children. And so it's important for you to at least acknowledge that and tell them, listen, these are the apps that I'm using. If you ever have a question, please reach out to me and ask me. If you don't want to share, your phone, if you don't want to do that, maybe allow your parents to also ask you questions in case they really want to know something, who you're talking to. So that's very important. And it is important also to ensure that schools are talking about this in the curriculum, in teacher training, so that we can identify maybe red flags or risky situations. So the digital footprint, do you know what that is? The digital footprint, yeah, go ahead.
Whenever we do something on the internet or post something, there are digital footprints. Even if we delete the stuff, it always remains there because there are traces.
And have you had this situation when you start talking about something and then you go on Instagram and immediately, like, you don't even need to search for anything. You start talking about, oh, I'm going to Goa. Let's say, I've never been, but I really want to go. Let's go to Goa, and then you go on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, or Google, and then you start seeing ads related to Goa. So like everything is being listened to. Maybe it's a little I don't know, paranoid of me, but yeah, people are listening, people are tracing and tracking what we're doing online. So it's very important to know, be careful about what you share. Be careful about where you share and with whom you share information. Be smart about you, the sites you visit, the emails you open, and the links you click. With friends, we tend to share photos. With other significant others, we tend to share photos. So it is, I don't know how to address this in a proper way, but if you're going to send photos of yourself, make sure that, for example, you don't have anything visible that can trace you or can make people know that picture belongs to you. So you can take some precautions so that when you share the information, there's a feature to like, how do you call that? Ephemeris? That when you share a picture, it'll only be shown once or twice and then it goes away. You can use those features if you want. Make sure that your face is not showing if you don't want it to be shown. Make sure that you don't have anything that can trace back to you. Those are some things that you keep in mind. Sometimes it can sound a little embarrassing to talk about this, but just keep it in mind. Look for ways through which you can keep your photos and your videos safe. So at the end of the day, you're protected. No one wants your pictures to be used for other purposes. I remember when I was in school, in medical school in the first years, someone created a Facebook profile and were posting pictures about other people saying mean things. And they collected my picture and they were talking about they were saying mean things about me, things that I had said to other friends, and that was very uncomfortable. So there are things you can do to keep your data and your photos protected and private and safe. Not only the ones that you post online on your profile, but also the ones that you send to other people. So take those precautions. That's very important. I've talked about also good uses of your data. So I want to ask you a question. Imagine if your school was going to do an assessment or implement a survey to assess the well-being and the mental health of students. What would you do if your school asked you to take a survey about your mental health? What would you ask? What would you do? Do you want to go? I see you have an expression that says, I really want to participate.
I mean, if there was a survey, of course, I would first go around asking people and jot down a few points and, figure out what's the most common answer that people are giving about their mental health and how they've been doing.
The school says we're going to implement a survey to assess students' mental health. Before the people even start responding, what would you say? What would you do? What would you think?
Yeah, to maybe start a program for the betterment of their mental health, create a questionnaire which they can answer, make them as comfortable as possible to answer that.
So as a counselor, which I can understand from that question is key, first of all, we have to identify why we are like collecting that particular data, like in terms of our mental health, and with whom we are actually collecting that data. So that way. So what is the purpose exactly why we are collecting all that kind of a data, and is it actually we are gonna use it like further? So that should be the question we should be asking first. And yeah.
Someone want to give me anything else? Do you guys want to share? No? Do you have a... For the recording.
Yeah, I think I would ask if somebody is going to take my analysis of my mental health, I would ask them if it's going to be confidential or not. Yeah, I think if...
So very good. The purpose, and the safety or privacy of that data. So, three things that you should always take into account. You cover the first one, the purpose and the scope. Always, if they're going to collect that information, ask. What's the purpose? Why are you collecting this data? What are you going to do with this? What is the scope? What do you intend to get out of this? How will the results be used to support me? If you're going to ask me so many things and then you're going to do nothing about it, then I'm not going to give you my information, right? And it's actually a harmful practice. For example, if someone asks you about suicide or have you thought about ending your life, and no one does anything, if you ask if you have a plan to deal with this situation and they say no, they shouldn't be asking that question. So it's important for you to know that it can be used for a greater good, but with some nuances. You take that with a grain of salt. So ask always, why are you collecting this information? What are you going to do after you get it? The second thing is ask about data collection, content, and follow-up. What kind of things are you going to be asking? What are you covering there? Are you going to inquire about my interpersonal relationships? Will you be asking my name? Is that information anonymous or not? who is going to be able to see that information? Is it mandatory or voluntary? And just so you know, you can always say no, even if they say it's mandatory. Even if they say it's mandatory, you can always say, I do not want to participate, and I have my right. Always. Always, always, always. Or maybe you answer once, and they're going to answer again, and they're going to implement that survey again. You can say, I don't want to participate anymore, and I want you to delete my data. You can also do that. Did you want to? No? So what topics are you covering? Is the survey mandatory or voluntary? You can always say it's voluntary. And how will you use the results in decision making? You can ask the school. Are you planning on providing trainings? Are you planning on giving us better support? Can we learn and read the results and the reports after? That's important for you to know. And then consent, privacy, and security. And our fellow teacher mentioned this. Will you be asking for parents and child's consent? They should always ask for consent. Always. Or they should let you know. Hi. Very good. No worries. We're talking about data, how to keep it safe, and how it can also be used to promote the well-being of students. And so they should always ask your parents, unless, in some countries, it's not always necessary when you're over 14 years of age. Sometimes they don't need to ask your parents. They only need to ask you. And when you're filling out a survey or you're giving information, they should always let you know that if you want to participate or you decline participation, you can say you decline. You can say you don't want to participate. And then they need to also let you know how the data is going to be protected. So I'm going to show you an example. I had another example. But so I changed this last minute because I saw you, most of you were students. So imagine that your Instagram has been hacked. What would you do? One thing. Say one thing. Change your password. So you try to log in, and if it doesn't let you log in, then you go to retrieve or recuperate your password, and then you change it. What else would you do? Is that it? Then you go online, and then like nothing happened? You report, inform. So there are in Instagram and in other applications, you can report. In the help center or in support, you can say, my account has been hacked. What else? You can try and find out why it got hacked, how it got hacked. You can ask that. Maybe it's going to take you a long time to figure that out. And what would you do with that information? Yes, or instead of just asking how it happened, maybe you can take some good practices. Like, for example, two-factor authentication. That's always a recommendation. Do you know how to do that? In Instagram and in other apps. So always, so instead of just asking, oh, why did it happen? What did it do? Where did I leave my keys? Then you might say, oh, I left them in the cab, or I gave this to... It can be thousands of reasons, and you'll never really know. But what you can do is to enable two-factor authentication. Also, go and review what other apps do you have connected to your Instagram. Maybe you log in with your Gmail account. And your Gmail account is connected with Instagram, with Twitter, with WhatsApp, with other things. And so most likely, they'll have access to your other accounts. So you should go check with other accounts, do you have linked? And try and change those passwords as well. And enable two-factor authentication. Very practical advice here. And so if you didn't know, you go to security. Sorry, we'll share the slides. But what this says, you go to security in settings, enable two-factor authentication, and then you get started. You choose which app do you want to use, and then that'll give you a code that you can use whenever you want to log in. And I see you nodding, so you've done it. You've done it. Good. So how to keep your data safe? First of all, have strong passwords. You know, they always say, oh, use capital letters, use numbers, special characters. One good way of thinking about it is, if you don't know how to use it, maybe create a phrase, a sentence, like my dog ate my pizza in 2023. Something like that. It's more difficult to hack. More difficult to hack. Or a mix of words using different characters. Something that you'll be able to know and remember. Be cautious with sharing. Only share personal details when necessary. Try to be really mindful of that. And be really careful who you share your location with. Some red flags to spot. Beware of phishing emails asking for personal or bank information, or, you know, I have friends I know that were sharing their Instagram accounts. And so one friend had access to different other accounts of other friends. And that's risky, because you not only have to be careful and mindful of how you behave, now you're in risk because there's another person managing your information. And maybe they're not being malicious about it, but maybe they click a wrong link, maybe they lose their phones, something might happen. And I know it's tedious, but read the data protection policy and the terms of conditions, always. And if you don't want to do it, what I do, I copy it, give it to ChatGPT, and say, please summarize it and give me the things that I really need to know. And so it just summarizes it, and I get the nutshell. I get to the nut of it, and I don't need to read this 15-page document, because no one reads that. There's a reason why they created so long. So you don't read it, but give it to ChatGPT, give it to Gemini, give it to Bard, wherever those. Ask it to summarize it for you, give you the key points, and then you'll be able to make better decisions whether you want to give that information or not. And so this, for parental involvement, it's important to discuss online safety regularly in school, at homes. And maybe, for parents, it's also very, very important more and more. Because when I was growing up, internet was there. I did have internet. I didn't have, when I was in school, we started having phones. So we're not really used to the different risks, and we don't know the different risks that there are today. So it's also very important to talk about your parents about this, to talk about with teachers about this, maybe creating rules so that you can feel safer, more protected, and then that you have someone you can turn to in case you need help. For teachers and for parents, be aware of emotional and behavioral changes, but also for you, when you see another friend who's feeling sad or feeling bad or feeling retracted, it is important for you to know and understand that something's happening. And you don't need to go and tell their parents. But if you have someone you can trust, like the counselor, for example, or a teacher that you really trust, go and let them know. Because we don't always know the best way to act. And so just find an adult that you trust. It doesn't have to be your parents if you don't want to. An adult that you can trust and that has your best interest, and let them know that maybe your friend is feeling bad, or your friend has been crying or is anxious. One time I had a situation. Someone was calling me. Colombia has a difficult history with narco traffic, and that's hurt our society very bad. One time I was in high school, and I had some friends. I don't know what happened. I don't remember really well, but someone started calling me and asking for information, saying that they knew who I was, where I was going. I was really afraid. I didn't know, how they came to my number. I thing that had anything to do with it. And I immediately went to my aunt. I didn't want to tell my mom, but I went to my aunt and said, you know, this is happening. She spoke with the person. She reported it to the police. I didn't know how to act. And so that could happen sometimes. So you need to be aware of it. And also, if a friend of yours is having that situation, go please and report it. And also, regularly check privacy settings and online activities with children, or check it yourselves. Maybe at one point I felt like, for example, I used to have my Instagram account open. And then I started seeing that different people were coming to my account and following me. And people started, I was giving a conference once, and my Instagram is personal. I don't do professional things in my Instagram. I use LinkedIn for that. But one day I was at a conference, you know, I was giving a talk, and the organizers, when they were presenting me and, you know, giving some feedback at the end, said, oh, by the way, Daniel's Instagram account is this. And a lot of people who weren't my friends started to follow me. So immediately I was like, okay, I need to go and change the privacy account and make my profile private. So be mindful of that. If you don't want people to be accessing your content, the stories that you're sharing, then you can change the privacy. You can also pick and choose who sees your stories, who sees your comments, and if there are people harassing you, and that happens very often, you can block them. Your mental well-being is of utmost importance, and you shouldn't tolerate anyone saying mean things about you. So report those people because of they're doing violent behavior, and you can block them. So the second part of this conversation that I wanted to really mention is that your data can also enhance your safety. So it's very important, and that's important that you know that we can use data to identify different risks. So when I work with schools, we usually collect data to assess if students are feeling unsafe in school. And I told you in the beginning that I was bullied a lot in high school. In that moment, we didn't call it bullying. And I was afraid and embarrassed of telling my parents and my teachers. I really didn't think that they were there to support me. Because, you know, when those things happened, I remember, I'm not that old. I'm just bald. I remember the faces of my teachers when that happened in the classroom, just turning their eyes away, looking out the window, looking up to the ceiling as if nothing was happening. So I didn't feel like school was a safe space for me. I had very little friends. And so right now what I do, one of the things that I do is that I monitor and I help schools monitor if children and students are feeling safe at school. If they're feeling safe at their homes as well. If they have someone they can talk to, someone they can trust. It doesn't necessarily have to be your parents. But you do need to have an adult in school who you can trust. If you don't have, then find one. And this is a call out to you guys as well. Ensure that every child, every student, every adolescent has someone that they can trust. And I hear many, many comments. Oh no, in schools. Oh no, we can't talk to that counselor because everything that we tell them, then we know they're going to tell our parents. Some information will have to be discussed with parents, but not everything. So find that person, that teacher, that administrator, that counselor that you can trust. Also at home. Maybe it's not your mom or your dad. Maybe it's a cousin. Maybe it's an uncle, an aunt. My parents loved me very much, but when I was growing up, my parents got divorced, and my mom was she was very hard on me. So even though she's not a bad parent, and she was doing the best she could, I didn't feel at the moment that I could trust my mom with my issues. I felt embarrassed. So I found, because my mom had many siblings, my grandmother had 14 children. Yes, 14 children. So I have many cousins. My mom was the youngest. So my cousins are like 40, 50 something. So very old. No, older. No, not very old. Sorry, I take that back. Older. So I had a cousin who I felt very close with, but he was an adult. He was a teacher, and him I could trust. So I could tell him, listen, I've been going through this stuff at school, or I'm going with this with my friends. So try and find someone in your family, try and find someone in your school that you can trust, always. And for you guys, always try and be that person students can refer to, or a parent that they can refer to. Information data can also be used to provide support, adequate support. And I'm going to tell particularly this to the adults in the room. When we're concerned, for example, about mental health of students or children, sometimes with the best of intentions, we define interventions and we generate workshops and activities and different things so we can improve the mental health situation of every student. But if we don't know the particular needs of every student, then it's not going to work for all of them. So when I was in school, I'll refer back to when I was in school, I was having, I didn't know that I had a mental health problem. But I did feel anxious all the time. I didn't want to go to school. I felt bad many days. And so the generic workshop given to the rest of my students about bullying or whatever didn't work for me because I needed special attention. So it is important that we collect data right now, nowadays, that we collect data so that we know maybe in a classroom of 30 people, there's 2 or 3 or 4 that need individual counseling, that need individual attention. So that can also be done, and we need that information sometimes to ensure that the care and the support that adults are providing and schools are providing and parents are providing, it's tailored to the needs of every student. So it's important for you to know that sometimes when the school collects that information, it's for them to be able to define better interventions. And for you guys, for the adults, it's important to assess the individual situation, the mental health situation, the risk situation of every student so that you can do a better job defining and creating interventions that will really yield results. I was working with a school who had an alcohol problem. They say, we have an alcohol problem in 9th grade. What? So people were drinking alcohol and they were just doing so many activities and they felt that it wasn't working. We were able to assess different risk factors of students and we were able to tell the school, listen, there are 12 students who are drinking heavily. We don't need to judge them, but we do need a one-on-one counseling with them because it's a risky behavior. They were drinking, they were getting drunk, they were forgetting what they were doing the previous day, and they had been in cars, either they were drinking or other people were drinking. So it's very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. The second cause of death of adolescents worldwide is road traffic accidents. So it's a risky thing, and it is important that you get the support and people get the support that they need. Then we found that there were 56 students who were drinking, not heavily, moderately, but they had very low connections with their families. They didn't think they had someone they could trust at home. And so we were able to tell the school, listen, let's do family workshops to strengthen family connections, but let's focus it on these 56 families that need better support. And we need to see that family connection is improving over time. So that's why we need data as well. And also for self-awareness. Sorry, can you take that? Thank you. Just out of respect of everyone. And then for self-awareness. Sometimes it's useful. Sometimes you're not aware of your emotions until you're asked about your emotions, right? So right now, nowadays, what I do every day is that I write. In the morning, the first thing that I do is that I write. journaling, you can call it journaling, or you can call it whatever you want. I don't necessarily journal. Sometimes I want to write about clouds. You have to leave, or all? Okay. If you can, I'll wrap this up in 2 minutes. Okay. So write about your emotions, do journaling, and that can help you become more aware of how you're feeling. So I just want to give you a practical example of how we do it. So I usually conduct assessments in schools, and what I tell students and teachers and parents is that the purpose and the scope, and you weren't here in the beginning, so in any activity collecting data, one thing that we need to know is the purpose and scope. Ask. If you're a parent, ask. What's the purpose of this and what's the scope? So for example, we try and help school counselors identify the well-being situation of every student, help them detect early warning signs, and ensure appropriate and timely care. So we communicate this to students, to teachers, to families. The content and the collection and the follow-up. So we tell this, and it's important for you to know and ask. For example, we conduct voluntary micro-surveys on emotional status, quality of relationships, safety perception in different environments, and different skills. Because that will help us give counselors recommendations and suggestions for one-on-one check-ins. And then we also tell the students and the families and the teachers and the staff that parents will be informed and consent will be collected if necessary. Sometimes it's not needed. It's voluntary for every student, and they can refuse to participate if they want. Only counselors will see individual results. Only counselors will see individual results, but other staff can get anonymized data on a group level. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, but I think we're short on time. Bye. Are you guys also? Yeah, you have to go. But for the ones of you remaining, if a school was going to conduct an assessment on the emotional well-being, what would make you want to participate in such an exercise? And I'm going to ask you. Sorry, you're the only 2 students remaining. So if your school told you, we're going to do an assessment on your well-being situation, what would give you like a good sense or a perception of safety to say, okay, I'm going to participate in this exercise? What would give you that sense of security and confidence?
Maybe they're convinced that if we shared, they probably would be able to help us or kind of give us a good direction if we need help. So I think no, it's okay. Um, Probably knowing that the person is an individual who is qualified to ask those certain questions. So that.
Thank you. So understanding that they're going to really use that information to support you better, and also that the people handling that information are qualified. And I'm going to say something else. I've worked a lot in youth-friendly services, healthcare services. It is of paramount importance that you know and you're certain that your counselor, for example, is going to keep that information confidential so you feel safe. What would you worry? Like, what worries would you have if you're a parent? Are you parents? Teachers? Parents as well? What worries would you have if, let's put on your parent hat. What worries would you have if the school that attends your children or that your children go to was going to do such a thing? What worries would you have? What would you worry about? I'll give you a minute to think about that. Would you have any worries? Any concerns? The same point. So your concern is, who is going to manage this information? Another concern? No? Because they're recording, so.
Okay, I would say there's nothing to worry about because I believe the school that is attending my child will make sure that it is for the best in their interest. So I think nothing to worry about.
You want to say something?
So I think it's the same. As a parent, I would not be worried because at least one channel of communication should be open. I mean, if my children cannot approach me for certain things, right? It's okay as long as they are approaching their teachers or someone who is qualified to help them in certain way and are also in the safe zone, right? So school generally we consider that it's a safe zone. Everybody worries about the learners there. They are doing anything and everything for the betterment of the child. So as long as they are sharing and that channel of communication is open, it's absolutely fine.
Thank you. Some parents might be concerned and they might be reluctant to have that data being collected. And I see you nodding. Can you think of a reason?
So I'm not a parent yet, but then assuming that I have a child and then he or she has a mental issue and we are about to share his or her details to the school, I would be worried that if that in any case would get leaked, it could be a subject of ridicule by our fellow students, classmates, and then even to the extent of bullying, using that subject as a topic. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or sometimes I've heard parents say, oh, I don't want school to collect information that is private. Maybe they're going to be asking about our family dynamics and I don't want anyone to know about our family. This is a private matter and no one should know. And so it's important to acknowledge that these things can happen. And for schools and for students, it's okay to have concerns and worries, but it's important to know and to address those concerns. So if we're worried about maybe information being leaked, then we can ask the school or ask the counselor, how are you going to keep this information safe? So I wanted to do a short exercise, very quick exercise, but you already know how to do that. Maybe so that you get kind of refresh about this, go to an account that you already have. Over here I have Instagram. Go to the settings right now. Go to settings and explore the different connections over there. Maybe check if you want to change anything. You can change if your private is account, if your account is private or public. You can check the accounts that are restricted. You can see the blocked accounts. You can mute accounts. You can check your close friends. You can edit the settings in the comments. And so I just invite you to explore that for a couple of minutes so that you remember that you can do that. I often forget that there are features and things that I can change and that I want to change. But because I never go there, I forget. So once in a while, I go to privacy settings and change some things. I forgot, for example, that you could block comments, that you can block in Twitter, you can block words that you don't want to read. So you can change many, many different things. And so just a friendly reminder to go constantly to the accounts that you use. So did you find it? Did you find how to do it? A network issue. But you go, so initially what you do is that you click your photo in the right hand over here, and then you go to the three lines, go to settings, and then in settings you can see account privacy. You can go to comments, block comment from any person. You can also see your stories, your activity status, the restricted accounts, the people who you have blocked. You can manage all of that. So remember that you can do that. Talk about that with your students as well, and do it yourself. It's a healthy practice. So we need to wrap up. 3 things to take away use strong passwords. If you don't know how to put a password, use a sentence. My dog ate my pizza, or yes, my dog ate my homework. Maybe you can do that. Be cautious about sharing and create awareness of threats, and also check the policies. I said before, if you don't want to read the entire policy, give it to ChatGPT, give it to someone, give you a summary. Protecting your data can help you also to safeguard your health and your well-being. So ask how they're using that data always. And small steps like the one we just took on checking your privacy settings can make a big difference. So discuss this openly, and I want to thank you very much for being here for this session. Do you have any questions, comments? It was a fairly interactive session. So thank you very much, and I was very happy to meet you and to be here. Thank you for your presence.